Good evening. This is the finale, lecture 8 of grammar. And we have a full program this evening. I want to start with a discussion of one theoretical topic that'll keep us for a while, and then we have the accumulated homework to take up, a little bit left over from number 6 and all of number 7. And then we have the final exam to take up and let you grade. And then if there's time, assorted questions pertaining to grammar in some way, insofar as you want to volunteer. Now, our theoretical topic for tonight is linguistic change and what to do about it. How to evaluate it, how to live with it, how to function in the face of it. And the first thing to establish is the sheer fact of linguistic change. It is pervasive. It applies to every aspect of a language: word meaning, pronunciation, punctuation, grammar, spelling. And it appears to be inherent in the fact of language as such. The most obvious, so let's first just establish the fact that, not that Heraclitus is right, that everything is changing in every respect in every instant, but nevertheless that there is a great amount of change in all languages. The most obvious is the case of change of word meaning. We've seen many processes, or you would be familiar with many processes by which this kind of change takes place. For instance, a word comes to mean something by analogy, and then pretty soon the analogy begins to become half dead. We saw examples of this, and then it's completely dead, and you end up with the word meaning something quite different from what its original meaning was. Remember, we had the example of the word examine when we discussed analogies, which started meaning weighing on a balance and ended up meaning analyzing evidence and so on. It had nothing to do with the idea of weight. There was a change of meaning brought about by an analogy which caught on and then died. There's the kind of change in meaning which takes place by the fact that we have a concept and then we borrow another from another language, and we realize we've got two terms which are more or less the same, so we proceed to differentiate the two and form two different concepts. For instance, an obvious example is naked and nude, both of which have the same general meaning. They come from two different sources, and they pretty much now have differentiated, so that nude is the neutral one, and naked has the nicer connotations. It's been said naked means everything off, and nude means nothing on, and therefore there's a differentiation between them. There are words that are suddenly disappear because of their connotation. You know, euphemisms begin to replace them and they vanish. There are words which started off very concretely and then are generalized in their meaning. For instance, the word tap, I was looking up recently, and according to this book, to tap originally means to draw liquid out of a barrel by means of a bung stop, you know, like a faucet type of affair. By extension, by generalizing this idea, to tap means to draw upon any resources whatever by making an actual or an imaginary opening into these resources. So we get, we'll tap his abilities. And there's a word that's now so generalized that it's lost its specific connection to drawing liquid out of a barrel. And of course the opposite takes place. The word shrimp, for instance, began by meaning shriveled, and then was applied to this little thing that looked shriveled, and the result is now it became the name for one specific type of shriveled thing. So that's called specialization. Now, I won't go on and on, but there are many of these processes charted by linguists by which words, according to perfectly understandable procedures, evolve and end up being very far removed from their original meaning. Now, this same principle, gradual but pervasive change, goes through the other aspects of language too, not simply word meaning. So you know, for instance, in regard to pronunciation, about what's called the great vowel shift. The great vowel shift, this happens to be a massive change in pronunciation which took place, nobody knows why, some centuries ago. And this author explains most English sounds today are very near to what they were more than 1,000 years ago. But certain words have changed so much that they would now be recognizable. This is in their pronunciation. And he gives these examples. We tell this, by the way, from poetry, which used to rhyme 1,000 years ago, and it sounds bizarre now because the whole pronunciation changed. For instance, the word which is now she was pronounced like our word shay. Boat, something like our word bought. Cut or cat, like our word caught. Meat, like our word mat, etc. Now, he goes on, these sound changes may seem as idiotic as the antics of a wild goose eating hash, but they are orderly to the point of being pedestrian, and they've actually charted this out and found that a specific thing has been happening to the English mouth the way it's set. And the vowels are moving, as he puts it, the sounds are moving forward and upward in the mouth about one jump. And they have that all technically worked out, but it's almost like an exact science of how the pronunciation was shifting. It's called the great vowel shift. They don't know why. They hypothesized that at some period all Englishmen got bad colds and they became more nasal and so on. But whatever it is, pronunciation is changing. You could even see, for instance, that regionalisms are now dying out under the influence of TV, which is suppressing many dialects. The same is true of grammar, even the venerable rules of grammar, some of them. For instance, Shakespeare felt very free to use two negatives in a sentence. I do not know nothing. And that was a technique of emphasis. Now that's grammatically invalid. Two negatives. Or is me. Is something that you see changing before your eyes. It used to be verboten, and now it's becoming more and more acceptable, although grammatically it should be on side. Punctuation, you know, for instance, that the colon lost its old meaning as a substantial stop. I'll let the silent go. And now looks forward, even spelling. In your own lifetime, you can see through is starting to be spelled more and more frequently. T-H-R-U, programming, drop the double M, etc. Now, given the fact of change in all regards here, what should be your attitude to it? And how should you, as a speaker and writer of the language, assess it? Well, there are two wrong responses, two false alternatives that I want to get rid of. One is the intrinsicist response. Remember, we talked about that in another form at the beginning of the course. The intrinsicist regards every feature of language as the equivalent of a revelation, cast in stone from the beginning of time, and therefore denies the possibility of options or the possibility of any change, the possibility of legitimate change. The intrinsicist attitude is anything new is rotten, it's bad, and you simply have to fight. That's obviously unjustified. On the other hand, the other false alternative is the what? The subjectivist approach, which is there are no principles. Anything new is good because it's new. Whatever people say is true. This is the permissive, whatever the latest wave is, that's what we do. Now those are, the intrinsicists almost have no representatives left except a few old desiccated grammar teachers somewhere valiantly battling against everything new. But the big wave today is the subjectivist, anything goes, because that's the way people speak. Now both of those are wrong, as you know, philosophically and grammatically. What would be a valid attitude to adopt with regard to change? Putting it broadly, the objective view, I would say, is this. You have to keep in mind that the rules of grammar, or more broadly of language, have a purpose. have a purpose to enable us to deal with concepts, to enable us to achieve clarity, exactness, logic in our communications. And that means there will be options within a certain range. That means some changes may deteriorate, may debase the language by violating the essential purpose which grammar is out to protect. Other changes may actually improve the language, may actually help us achieve greater clarity, greater logic, greater exactness, greater consistency, in which case they are desirable. And still other changes may do neither. They may be simply a new way of doing an old job. They may be simply a different form of achieving the same essential purpose of clarity, logic, and exactness, in which case there would be a legitimate option. To evaluate a change, therefore, you have to ask two questions, two basic questions. First and foremost, what is the reason? Why is this change taking place? What's the explanation? Until you know that, you're not in a position to assess what's going on fully. And then, as a result, is the consequence of this change that a linguistic value is lost or not? If some linguistic value is lost, the change is deleterious and should be fought if possible. If no such value is lost, then you have no grounds on which to fight it, even if it means a different way of achieving that value. Now, the best way to put some body onto this is give you some examples, more or less at random, from different kinds of cases, so you appreciate the complexity and the type of considerations involved in deciding. So let's just jump in, and I have 5 or 6 examples here to give you in pattern how I would go about analyzing when to accept a change, when to be chary of it and say I'm not going to use it yet, when to actively oppose it. Let us take the example I mentioned directly from the rules of grammar, 2 negatives. I did not know nothing would be considered by Shakespeare perfectly good English. It was a way of giving emphasis. Not only I did not know nothing. And the 2 negatives were like hammering, emphasizing something. Now that's considered simply flatly wrong. Now the standard thing you'll hear as well, and then it's a matter of opinion. Shakespeare felt one thing, and we feel one thing, and it's all arbitrary, and we just have to follow the arbitrary rules. But if you analyze this, linguists have got a perfectly good explanation for why this change came about in the course of English development, for which you have to know something about the history of English and the type of language it is. And in fact, I have referred to this fact at one point in discussing language. Who knows what it is about the English language and its development in general that accounts perfectly for this changed attitude toward 2 negatives in the last number of centuries? Does anybody have an idea? This is something essential to the whole nature and development of English. Yes?
2 negatives make a positive?
No, that's our present construction of that, but that's not how it was taken, that 2 negatives make a positive. That Shakespeare did not take it that way. 2 negatives for him made a strong negative, you see. So you're giving a mathematical analogy, but that per se is not approved yet. Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering whether it's something about the growth of language gives other ways to give emphasis.
Well, yes, but the fact of other ways to give emphasis is not per se a good argument unless there's something wrong with this way or something that was superseded about this way. Yeah.
Does it have anything to do with the distributive nature of the language?
Very good. Excellent. It has something to do with the distributive nature of English, not of language, but of English. English started much closer to the classical languages in being rather heavily inflected. In other words, they established grammatical relationships by endings, and word order was not that important. And so long as you're in that frame of mind, 2 negatives are simply taken as a negative and a negative. They're not taken in relation to each other by their order, because order is not the primary consideration. So just say, no, I don't, no, it's nothing. You see, it's how it's taken. As English began to develop more and more into the form of a distributive language, where word order was the primary governing interpretation of the language, and inflections began to decay, more and more words began to be taken into relation with one another. So when you began to say, I did not know nothing, nothing was now heard as the object of what you did not know. It was essential to its position. And consequently, you began to hear, I did not know. What didn't I know? Nothing. Well, if I didn't know nothing, I must know something, then, you see. By the sheer fact of taking word order as the primary factor governing your interpretation of the language, suddenly the relationship of those two negatives obliterated the negativity. And people began to say, well, you can't say that. You say, I did not know something to communicate your meaning. Now, you see, this is a perfectly logical change. In fact, you could even say it's an improvement, because the principle of English, the basic principle, is a distributive language. And consequently, this is like outgrowing an earlier, more inflected form, becoming more consistent with its basic principle. And therefore, that's a change that there would be no grounds to oppose, and no value is lost. The only thing conceivably lost by this change is the kind of emphasis that you could get from two negatives, but there are many other techniques of emphasis, as you know, so we're not restricted to that. All right, that gives you a model of a type of change that's explicable and even an improvement. Although, you know, there was a transitional period, I'm sure, where there's a lot of diehards were outraged at the killing a good old 1,000-year-old device of emphasis, but still, you see. Now take as a second example. I'm giving you these at random just to give you different types of cases. The who, whom, and I, me distinction. Now, these distinctions are in process of leaving us. This is my opinion. Obviously, I can't tell you that from the perspective of a couple centuries from now, but you more or less get a feeling for when something is around to stay and when it's starting to go, and when large numbers of educated speakers begin to feel that the correct rule is artificial, phony, or pretentious, you can be sure that it's going to start to fade in their speech, and when it does, they set the terms and it's going to fade everywhere. So this is, I think, on its way out. Now, how would you analyze it? If this goes, have we lost a value in the capacity to communicate? Now, my analysis of that would be these terms, who, whom, I, me, are helpful but non-essential. They're non-essential as proved by other pronouns, both personal and relative, which do their job and get along perfectly without any inflection. For instance, it, and which, which do perfectly in both the subjective and the objective with no inflection. Now, I would say, therefore, sometimes you can get a little smoother sentence and tell the relationship right away with these different case endings, but the fact is that English is not an inflected language, and gradually these inflections are dying, and consequently this one probably will die too. Already, you notice, you're allowed to say it is me even in formal writing if you add, I'm doing this for emphasis, because me is felt to be stronger than I, which just sits there as a vowel with no consonant. Now, how would you handle this then? Suppose I'm right up to this point. We're still in process of transition on this now. It's not like the two negatives, which is already a fait accompli. So how would you handle this? Would you just flatly violate it and go out along and write, in effect, the boy who I saw? Would you write that? Just give up the M altogether. You wouldn't, he hit I. You wouldn't do that yet, even though in some cases it's dying. It's obviously in transition at this stage. The moral I would draw from it is this. I can see that this is going, but it is not yet gone. It is still more alive than dead, although it's gradually dying out. Therefore, from my point of view, I would use it in its traditional form still at the present time, because it hasn't yet died. But I wouldn't make a huge philosophical or grammatical fuss about it. In other words, if I saw somebody saying it is me, I wouldn't, sneer and get all excited and so on. Because I think in the long run, the logic of the language is going to be on the side of getting rid of some of these, this type of distinction. Although, as I say, I myself would not do it because it's too soon. Yes?
I don't understand the roots of these kind of changes. Why do they occur?
Well, they occur, I don't know what to tell you beyond what I've said. In this type of change, along with the two negatives, I think is simply a development of the dying of inflections. As more and more comes to depend on word order, there's less and less depends on varying the form of a word. And I and me and who and whom are just inflected forms of the same word. You see. So more and more we're moving in one direction. Yes?
How would you separate the change of language, which is natural, from bad educational system?
Well, you have to decide in each case what is the cause. I couldn't give you a blanket, but I'm going to give you other examples if you give me a second. Here's an example, for instance. This is taken now from word usage rather than rules of grammar. Take the use of the word into. Its current slang use. Now, into originally was a plain, ordinary, neutral preposition meaning spatial movement. I walk into the room, right? That's all it meant. But in its present use, he's into swimming, he's into girls or whichever. That's the word. You understand that? That use. Now, how would you analyze that? That is a change in the word into. It's a brand new sense, maybe in the last 10 years or whichever. Now we're speaking about formal prose. Obviously, you can mimic any slang for purposes of being au courant, but that's not what we're talking about. Yes?
That, if you use it like that, like integral, so on and so forth, you're destroying your ability to communicate an idea.
You are definitely losing a great value. An essential value is whenever you use it in that way. Why? It then functions as what you can call an empty connective. An empty connective means a word which relates one thing to another in no way. It simply tells you, I don't know what the connection is, but I'm going from A to B. So if you say, he is into tennis, you're saying there's some relationship between him and tennis, but I can't think, don't know, or won't say what it is. He likes tennis, he plays tennis, he is interested in tennis, he envies tennis players, he's obsessed with tennis, I haven't the faintest. He's just into it, that's all. There's something tying him in it, but I don't know what. That's what's called an empty connective, and it is an arch example of a slovenly or lazy mental process, because you don't say what you're after.
Doesn't it just mean that he likes it?
No, it doesn't. Because if you just mean likes, you'd say likes. Into includes every possible relationship. Likes, plays, is interested, who knows? Yes.
Doesn't it come to mean completely involved and be connote that?
It could ultimately come to mean something specific. In fact, if it survives at all, it would only survive ultimately by virtue of the fact that one of its meanings will, become specific enough to fulfill some function. But right now, it is not functioning as that. It's functioning as essentially like you know. You know what you know functions in conversation? It's said only by people who don't know. They say it because they can't say what it is that's on their minds. So they go, you know. Now, let me give you a different type of example again. Again, of linguistic change. We used to have the word inflammable, which meant capable of being set fire to, easily capable of catching fire. And that is now going out, and in its place is coming flammable. Now, you had to write, would you like flammable or inflammable? And here again, the question is, before you can answer that, these are not arbitrary. I'm trying to give you the pattern. You have to analyze what type of consideration leads to these changes, and then you're in a position to assess it. Now, what is the factor that leads to this change? I think it's a comprehensible, although not mandatory change. But it's understandable because there was a certain problem for English speakers with the word inflammable. And what was the problem? Yes.
The IN at the beginning of it.
The IN at the beginning is used in a great many words as a negative prefix, like independent, intolerant, intransigent. And at a certain point, in conveys negative. And yet this came from the word inflame, which means to catch fire to. So inflammable began to ring in people's ears on the analogy of all those negative ins as can't be set fire to, which was the exact opposite of the meaning. So they thought, we'll drop the in and make it flammable. Well, now, you see, that's an intelligible motive to remedy what was becoming a linguistic problem. But the trouble is now you don't know what any of them mean, because you have flammable and inflammable. And whatever you use, you're not sure any longer, because your automatic response has been undercut by the fact of this change. So you have to now puzzle when it says inflammable. You now think flammable, but then you remember the old inflammable, and you're completely stopped, and that even spills over to flammable. You can't remember now as flammable, it's supposed to be the opposite of inflammable, which meant you could catch fire, so it's completely up in the air. So it's an intelligible change, but we're right in the midst of that change at this time, and therefore my conclusion would be intelligible, but I'd never use either, without some explanation, because it's now too much influence. As a general rule, therefore, I would draw this conclusion from this type of case. If something is changing in a comprehensible way, but the change is not fixed yet, stay away from it till other people get burned in the using of it, establish it, or if you use it, say what you mean in parentheses. Inflammable, i.e. cannot catch, or can, in this case, can catch fire. See what I mean? Now, let's take a few that are a bit more philosophical. I'm giving you here more or less purely linguistic cases, but let's take a couple in conclusion that are more philosophical. Take the distinction between disinterested and uninterested. Now, if you know traditional, books on grammar and so on, virtually every author bewails the fact that this distinction is dying. And they make a big fuss about the ignorance of people who use disinterested to mean uninterested, and the dictionaries stand on their head to try to force this distinction down your throat, and despite everything, it's fading away. Now, what is the explanation here of the fact that this is fading away? First of all, how many know what that distinction used to mean, and according to dictionaries, still mean? Yes.
I think it means...
Now get it right. Yeah.
All right, I'll try.
The fact that you have difficulty shows the problem. Yeah.
Okay, because...
All right, never mind.
I will tell you why. Okay, basically, the distinction is somebody that's disinterested, has knowledge of something, but he is staying away from being swayed by, whereas somebody who's uninterested just doesn't care.
You have the idea there, yes.
Impartial.
Disinterested is supposed to be impartial, fair, not biased. Uninterested is simply indifferent. You don't give a damn one way or the other. Now, they both are built on the concept of interest. Uninterested, you don't have any. disinterest, you can have an interest, but you don't allow your interest to sway you. That's the idea. Now, what was the philosophic implication of forming such a concept as disinterest? To form a special concept, in effect, to say my interest is not prejudicing. Yes.
Belief that a person who's involved in an issue can't be objective.
Right. It was basically the idea that an interest per se corrupts. An interest per se, in some matter, is a factor which tends to make you prejudiced. And therefore they tried to enforce this concept of disinterest. But actually there's no philosophic justification for that. It's philosophically unwarranted. It comes from some kind of Kantian or Christian approach, according to which the good is to have no interest, and interest is a corrupting agent. And as a matter of fact, we have a concept, perfectly good concept, without any woozy philosophic connotations, to cover exactly not being slanted, not being biased, just going by the facts, etc. And that is objective. Now you see the difference. Objective means focus on the object, as against disinterested, which is don't let your interests screw things up. That's an entirely different philosophic approach. Therefore, my attitude would be this distinction is dying, and it's a good thing. I'm happy to let this distinction die because it is philosophically suspect or even corrupt. Plus, we have a concept to name exactly what it's supposed to do. Now, I use this distinction occasionally myself, even though I know that it's dying, only where there's some literary value. For instance, I have a sentence on Kant somewhere in a book that according to him you should be not only disinterested but uninterested in something or other. And by using the two together, you make it clear that you're retaining that distinction, and you want the two words interest side by side. That's okay. But as a basic term, I stay away from that and let it die. Now, let me conclude our examples by giving you one of a different kind. What about the term selfish? Now, I've been told 1,000 times, why do you use that term? It has a negative connotation, it conveys the image of brute and a monster and so on. Why don't you just drop it and use another term? Why hold on to that? Now, how would you analyze that? Yeah.
Well, you would go back to what a valid definition of selfish is.
Well, but if you gave a valid definition, this person would say yes, but it conveys this connotation in people's mind, whatever you say. Yes.
There isn't another word.
Well, there's egoist. Egotistical.
You have to say
It has the same connotation, right. So now you have this question. We have only one concept. It's not like disinterested versus objective. There's no other concept, and anytime you bring one in, it right away captures the same connotation. Now that shows that we're not dealing with simply linguistic accident, that the word carried a bad connotation. Why did it carry this connotation? And why do all its synonyms? For one reason, because the cultural atmosphere is set by an altruist approach, and therefore any term designating selfishness is already monstrous. All the philosophic authorities are saying this is vicious and so on and so. This is not a linguistic issue at all. It's a purely philosophical one. If you try to abandon the word or any of its synonyms that had negative connotations, you literally could not use the concept, which means you would be left in a situation where either you're self-sacrificial or zero. There would be no other term even to designate the alternative. Now, in a case like this, you have to put up a fight. Even if the whole world claims to be changing and it's negative, and etc., you have to take a stand because this is a purely philosophic fight, you see. It's not like the word liberal, for instance. Now, the word liberal switched its meaning, but you can throw it out. You can say, oh, the hell with it then, I'm not using it anymore. Or I'll use it in its modern sense, because it just represents one political view, and there's 1,000 other words for the other political view. But this is a word which represents a philosophic issue, and abandoning it would leave you wiped out on a crucial issue. Now you see, we can multiply this endlessly, but I just want to give you a taste of the type of factors, the whole variety that's involved. And some of it is this. There is a variety of types of causes, ranging from the logic of the language as it develops across centuries, to the random slovenliness of a given generation, to fundamental philosophic issues that may or may not be behind a given linguistic or grammatical change. And that has to be taken into account. Then in addition, there's a variety of degrees as to how far gone the change is, whether it's already a fait accompli, or it's just in process, or it's just starting and you should fight it actively. How much trouble is there to combat it? I mean, do you have to write an essay every time you use the word to explain whether you're still using it in the old form, etc.? How big a value is at stake? All that has to be weighed and evaluated, and then you have to make a policy in your own mind. And if you're not sure, the best thing to do is either stay away from it while it's in flux, or put in parentheses. I use it in this sense. And that way, you keep yourself covered. Well, that is in essence what I wanted to say simply about the approach to linguistic change. And that's the last topic I wanted to cover of a theoretical kind. But I want to conclude with one passage from this book, The Reader Over Your Shoulder by Graves and Hodge. All the way through, we have been discussing exactness, precision of expression, all the way through the course. And this is a perfect little example of the difficulties of being perfectly precise and exact. So I thought this is apparently a true story that they tell. With regard to the difficulties of being perfectly exact, so I'll leave you with this story. They have in this book, The Reader Over Your Shoulder, a series of good principles of style. Could organize it differently, but one of them is no word or phrase should be ambiguous, which of course is eminently good principle. And here they give this example of the difficulties. And this is apparently taken from the minutes of a borough council meeting in England. You just have to know that the word lead, L-E-A-D, in England is used as we would use leash, you know, that you put around a pet. Now this is taken apparently directly from the minutes of this meeting. Councillor Trafford took exception to the proposed notice at the entrance of South Park. The notice was to be, no dogs must be brought to this park except on a lead. He pointed out that this order would not prevent an owner from releasing his pets from a lead when once safely inside the park. Right? The chairman then said, what alternative wording would you propose, Council? He answered, dogs are not allowed in this park without leads. Councillor Hogg, Mr. Chairman, I object. The order should be addressed to the owners, not to the dog. Councillor Trafford, that is a nice point. Very well then. Owners of dogs are not allowed in this park unless they keep them on leads. Councillor Hogg, Mr. Chairman, I object. Strictly speaking, this would prevent me as a dog owner from leaving my dog in the garden at home and walking with my wife across the park. Councillor Trafford, Mr. Chairman, I suggest that our legalistic friend be asked to redraft the notice himself. Councillor Hogg. Mr. Chairman, since Councillor Trafford finds it so difficult to improve on my original wording, I accept. Nobody without his dog on a lead is allowed in this park. And the other guy said, Mr. Chairman, I object. Strictly speaking, this notice would prevent me, as a citizen who owns no dog, from walking in the park without first acquiring one. Councillor Hogg, with some warmth. Very simply then, dogs must be led in this park. Councillor Trafford, Mr. Chairman, I object. This reads as if it were a general injunction to the borough to lead their dogs into the park. Councillor Hogg interposed a remark for which he was called to order. On his withdrawing it, it was directed to be expunged from the minutes. The chairman, Councillor Trafford, Councillor Hogg has had 3 tries. You have had only 2. Councillor Trafford comes back. All dogs must be kept on leads in this park. The chairman, I see Councillor Hogg rising quite rightly to raise another objection. May I anticipate him with the following. All dogs in this park must be kept on the lead. This draft was put to the vote and carried unanimously with 2 abstentions. Now that is a good example to keep in mind, although they overdo it a bit, but you see how staring at something you can come up with all these different interpretations. Okay, that concludes the theory, and let's start taking up some of the homework. First from lecture 6, if you want to get out there. All right, I think we had done through number 8. And we're starting now number 9. By the time he had reached 60 years of age, etc. All right, if anybody remembers this far back, who has this one? Yes.
By the time he had reached 60 years of age,
Now let's speak out loudly, okay?
by the time he had reached 60 years of age, comma.
Age, comma. Right, what?
Because on the other hand is a
Sentence modifier, right.
modifier.
Goes with the whole sentence. It's not as though he was 60 years of age on his hand. On the other hand, applies to the whole sentence, so it's a parenthesis, so it's surrounded by commas. Okay, next.
On the other hand, comma, such memories, comma, although still recurrent, take away the comma.
Absolutely no comma after recurrent. Why?
It goes with undisturbed, it's recurrent and
Right,
disturbed.
it's 2 adjectives and there's nothing whatever to separate them, no reason. So you take it out after recurrent, put it in after disturbing as it is, and what else?
Had become no comma, increasingly no comma.
Yes, take out the commas around increasingly, because it's completely useless. Now, there could be contexts in which you could put a word like increasingly in commas, if you wanted to emphasize it, but it would be very bad in this sentence. Why?
Because it is one thought, increasing.
No, that's not the main reason that it's one thought. Maybe you want to say had become not only infrequent, but more and more, and you want to really stress it. But in this particular sentence, it's not a good idea to put commas around increasing. Why?
It's already comma heavy.
It's comma heavy already. And remember, we don't want to overdo it and break it up into so many units that you can't hold it. And therefore here, no matter how much emphasis you wanted to give increasingly, it's a bad idea. You're chopping this sentence up into such little fragments that it's too much to take. Number 10. Go.
Going to a top-rated Ivy League college was a hideous comma.
Put a comma after hideous. Why?
Because, hideous and brain-corroding modify psychological experience.
Right. Psychological experience is the noun. Even though psychological is an adjective, this functions as one thought unit, like oak tree, etc. And therefore it's 2 coordinate adjectives, hideous and brain-corroding, or brain-corroding and hideous.
Right.
And so there has to be a comma after hideous, but none after corroding.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. But it taught...
Wait a minute, where did you go after?
Wait a minute, okay, hideous, comma, brain-corroding, no comma, psychological experience. But it taught...
You don't put any comma after experience?
Oh, I guess I missed one.
There is a rule that you have to put a comma after experience. Why? Here.
Two main
Two main clauses coordinating conjunction. But.
Right, that's right.
Okay, next.
Okay, but it taught me and my friends take out those two commas.
Take out those two commas
Because they're the
because
object.
you're simply splitting two direct objects, right? Excuse me, two indirect objects.
Right.
Me and my friend.
That's right.
So you taught the lesson to me and to my friends. They're both indirect objects, and there's two of them. And again, you don't split a compound object, direct or indirect. So those commas are wrong. Now that's fine, except you left out one possible comma. Depending on the meaning. This depends entirely on the person's meaning. Who sees a place in this sentence in which a comma could be correct, but would change the meaning from what it is here? Jim.
After top rated.
After top rated. That entirely depends on the person's meaning. Give me the two meanings. If there is a comma after top rated, what would you mean?
We're distinguishing between top rated and Ivy League.
No, you're saying that all Ivy League are top rated. If you put a comma after top rated, you're saying top rated and Ivy League. But if you don't put a comma after top rated, what are you saying? Yes.
Some Ivy League colleges aren't top.
You're distinguishing two types of Ivy League, the top rated type of Ivy League and the non-top rated. See? So if you're saying, for instance, Harvard and Yale are really only the ones I'm talking about. The top rated Ivy League, and it's the top rated kind of Ivy League, and consequently no comma, because they're not coordinate then. Top rated modifies Ivy League. But if you're saying all Ivy League are top rated, then you're saying going to a top rated and Ivy League. So you put a comma. Yeah, that's whether it's coordinate or not. And this is a case, and there are many in which, in a series of adjectives, a comma changes the meaning, changes the implication. All right, number 11. Yes.
I would take out the two commas surrounding Main Street
Take out the two commas after Main Street. Why?
because it's restrictive. He's referring
It's a restrictive what?
to a restrictive.
It's a substantive after a substantive. A proper name after the word novel.
A positive.
It's a restrictive appositive. It's not just any novel, it's the novel Main Street. So it restricts the subject, therefore it is no commas. And by the same reasoning,
Oh, I would leave the commas in for a stitch in terms.
no, you wouldn't. Same exact reason. The theory is, the sentence is, his novel never used this sentence. Not just a sentence in general, but the sentence such and such. And consequently, no comma after sentence. A stitch in time saves 9 is equally a restrictive appositive. See? Yes.
Regarding a comma before quotes in reporting direct speech, John said, comma, quote. What is the rationale for that, or is there a rule for that, when that is to be
Well, that's really a
tolerated
technical
and suppressed?
copy editing rule. Basically speaking, you can use a comma simply because it's like an introduction. John said you could either say a colon or but a comma for that kind of frequent thing. It's simply a way of separating a long object from the word said. John said that so-and-so, but instead of the that, you just drop it and put quotes. All right, let's go to number 12. Who had what for number 12? Yes.
I would take the comma out of the first sentence.
Yes, no comma after home. Why? You're breaking up an essential construction. The construction is so tired that, and therefore you're breaking up, you're separating inseparables.
And I would put a comma after intellectual.
And you put a comma after intellectual. Why?
Well, you're describing more polish. In other words, more polish, I mean to say more intellectual than his predecessor.
Well, there's a little more exact reason than that. What word goes with polished? What word is to be taken immediately after polished? Than. And what word after intellectual? Than, and therefore this is two expressions running into the same point, which is a confluence, so a comma after intellectual. And now 13 is a sentence from Miss Rand, or at least part of a sentence. And I put it in simply to indicate to you the esoteric considerations that are involved sometimes in these restrictive versus non-restrictive commas. I had in mind simply the question, the comma after child. Should there be a comma or not? Well, it entirely depends on a shading of meaning which is virtually unholdable, and I put this in simply as an example. What does it depend on, whether you put a comma after child or not? Now, she did. What is the distinction? Harold.
Whether the disillusioned child is already the one who had expected pre-digested capsules of knowledge.
In other words, it comes down to...
Restrictive or unrestricted?
Yes, but it comes down to this. Does the writer intend to distinguish two types of disillusioned child or not? If the writer is saying there's two types of disillusioned child, there's the disillusioned type who expects pre-digested knowledge, and then there's other types of disillusion, then there would be no comma. You just read it right in as restricted. On the other hand, if the writer implies there's only one type, all disillusioned children in this type of context are the kind who would expect pre-digested capsules, then you put the comma in. Now, presumably, she felt in this situation that since it's an analogy, it would be over-precision to distinguish two types of disillusioned child in this context. So she put the comma in to indicate that she's using disillusioned child in such a way that any child which you would call disillusioned would be the type that would expect pre-digested capsules. But you see, that is so fine a point that I put it in just to show you the sort of consideration. Yes.
Is the use of the word had there correct? Who had? Isn't there a shift in...
Yes, because she is using had there because she means at a time previous to when he was confronted with the results.
But how can you... I don't understand why that shouldn't be has.
Because she's not bringing it to the present, she wants to complete it in the past. But
Right.
you have to see her whole context for that. You couldn't explain that from just what we have here. But this isn't even a whole sentence. The three dots at the end means I just copied the part that was relevant to our exercise. Okay, and now let us go to the exercises from number 7. Errors or deficiencies in diction. Help yourself if you don't have a copy of this. The soloist at Carnegie Hall, number 1, scampered across the stage and tucked his fiddle under his chin. Now, all of these, the implication is they're supposedly formal English. Now, pick the words in order that you could pick on here and indicate briefly why. Yes.
Scampered.
Scampered, number 1. What's wrong with scampered?
The connotation is wrong.
Yes. Connotation is poor for some supposedly dignified context where they're charging $25 or $50 a seat, and so on. Scampered is a verb which is very light and playful and appropriate to children or mice, but certainly not even if you hurried and he was late, you would never say Yasha Heifetz scampered across the stage because it's just too light and silly a word in connotation for this type of context. What else?
And
Next, go ahead.
fiddle.
Well, okay, fiddle. What's wrong with fiddle? Now, scampered is not colloquial. Scampered is formal, but it has a connotation. What is wrong with fiddle?
Well, in my opinion, fiddle is usually used for something other than a solo is retarded. You call someone
But why? Why is it not used? That's correct. We would never say this.
is a colloquial.
Yes, fiddle is colloquial for violin. And it implies a kind of casual, breezy, you know, a hunk of wood that you, and catgut that you scratch, you know. It's, Jack Benny plays the fiddle when he was alive, played, but not a soloist at Carnegie Hall. And from that point of view, it's too light and colloquial a word. Now, there's another word in the first sentence that you could easily object to on the same grounds. Wrong connotation for a dignified formal context. Yes.
Tucked.
Tucked. Now, tucked has a use, unlike fiddle, tucked, well, even fiddle, in a different meaning, has a formal use to fiddle around with something, but tucked has a formal use. To tuck the sheet under the mattress is a formal use of tuck, to fold in the loose ends. But when you say tuck the fiddle under his chin, that is what type of use? It's a colloquial, light, metaphorical use. You know, as though he just slept it under his chin the way you stick a sheet under a mattress, and it goes with, he's scampered, and he picked up his fiddle, etc. It's that light, unserious, largely colloquial connotation. So if you were to do this formally, you'd have to say something like he walked across the stage and placed his violin or his Stradivarius or whichever, positioned it or whichever. Okay, number 2. Now you see the use, if you're aware of this issue, if you want, and you do it deliberately, you could terrifically undermine the guy's performance by using one of these deliberately to suggest he's not worthy of a formal discussion. He's such a bad violinist. But you have to do that in a context where it's clear that it is your intention and not simply your ignorance. All right, number 2, I took from Forster and Stedman, at least the last half I took from them. Yes?
It's a half-dead metaphor.
It's a half-dead metaphor which comes right back to life. What is the metaphor?
Absorbed in.
Absorbed in the solution that she was preparing. Now you can be absorbed, wrapped, intent, you know, but when you bring it into a solution, you're going back to the original context, and consequently it comes back to life. So that's absurd. There is technically another error in this, but apropos of linguistic change, this is an error which is dying out, so you may not be sensitive to it. This would not, the thing I'm thinking of in this sentence would not now be regarded as wrong, although not so long ago it would have been. I was brought up to regard something else in this sentence as flatly wrong. What? Todd?
Just using being there.
No, being is okay. That's just a participial instead of since he was. You can make a participial.
Well, it sounds strange for formal English. You say something, I would think you'd say something else like as he was.
Since he was. You would more likely expect a clause, but a participle is a stylistic thing. But no, I'm thinking of something that would be regarded in the old days as flatly wrong. Yes?
Just when we were talking about in the lecture, the difference between which and that, it seemed that he was preparing as essential to the chemical solution, so you should use that.
Well, if you want to argue that, I'm thinking of something less obvious than that. The 2 after oblivious. Oblivious is like unaware, and it takes of. The idiom is oblivious of, unaware of, ignorant of. All these cognitive terms take of. But, as I say, 2, which was completely wrong, is pushing out of. So the idiom is changing before your eyes and it doesn't strike you. So I put that in as an example of an actual idiom. That is, preposition which is supposedly wedded to the preceding word as a unit, which has become dissolved and you can't even tell it anymore. All right, number 3. Okay, take them in order. 3 has got several.
Okay. Alluded.
Alluded is wrong.
Wrong.
Why?
Because
Simply wrong word.
Wrong meaning.
Why?
it denotes necessarily that the terms are going to be somewhat uncertain. It implies a hint rather than.
An allusion is an indirect reference, something that you leave to implication, that you don't come out and flatly, explicitly say. And what else is there in this sentence that tells you that he flatly said it?
It's no uncertainty.
So it's a direct contradiction. And this is an example. I told you that there are synonyms that have different meanings. Refer and allude is one such pair. And that's why I put allude in here in its wrong usage. Okay, what's next wrong about this sentence? Harry.
I had in mind the next sentence. Do you mean this?
Well, no, the same sentence. Now, I'm going by all the categories we introduced last time and talking about the desire to write clear, accurate, fresh prose. Now, there is a walking bromide in this, which is itself a bromide, in this sentence, which is what? In no uncertain terms. It's a trite, dead, canned expression. Very poor stylistic. It would be much stronger to say he referred to the fact with certainty. Much stronger than to give this phony, or phony because dead, trite, canned. Now, what about the next one? I mean, the next sentence in 3 has another word wrongly used. Oh, I gave that away, I shouldn't have. But you did the homework anyway. Yes?
I changed source up.
Source is wrong. Why?
I didn't think a headache had a source. I thought it had a cause.
Cause. Right. Cause is that which produces. Source is that from which something came or began or arose. You could say, for instance, the source of Hitler's idea of racism is H.S. Chamberlain, Fichte, or whoever. That's where it started. But you couldn't say the cause of his idea of racism is Fichte. Fichte began it, but the cause of Hitler accepting that idea would be a whole bunch of different things. Now here you're talking about what produced the headache, and it would not even be clear what you meant when you said the source of this headache. It would imply that the headache began, for instance, in his big toe and then moved up his foot and so on and ended up in his head. Now this is another example like alluded and referred. Those are not synonymous. They are synonyms in a very general way, but they have exact differences. And you can't use one for the other.
Should there be commas around he said?
Should there be commas?
What am I thinking of? Something.
Yes, in this case there should be. Because otherwise, if you didn't have, you're thinking of those parenthetical inserts are not necessary. But in this case, if you didn't have the parenthetical insert, it would sound like the doctors is the object of what he said. The doctors, he said. And you want to throw it away. So in this case, the commas are okay. In fact, I think they're clarifying. Number 4. Lots of mistakes in this one. Who's got 1 in number 4? Kathy.
He was a cynic, certain of nothing.
Yes.
Rather
What's wrong with that?
unnecessary after you said cynic and not quite having the same meaning.
So yeah, what's the difference between a cynic and someone who's certain of nothing? Cynic is certain of something. Namely, that people are worthless. What's the term that would cover skeptic? It's not the same as cynic. What is the difference? A skeptic says knowledge is impossible, or certainty. A cynic says virtue is impossible. No one is any good. It's not the same thing. Now here, therefore, it's a misuse of the term. And I cued you into that by giving certain of nothing. So actually, all you'd have to say is, although he is a skeptic, you wouldn't even have to say certain of nothing because that's contained in the phrase, but cynic is certainly wrong. Who got something else wrong in number 4? Yes.
Very prepared.
Good for you. Very prepared is wrong. Why?
Well, it's the wrong intensifier. If you want an intensifier at all for prepared, you would say thoroughly prepared, or...
What if you wanted to use the word very? What would you have to do?
Very well.
Very well prepared.
Well prepared.
Yeah, very highly prepared. And the principle is, I quote, in formal usage, very and to cannot be used to modify a participle. You must say, he was very much distressed. He was too painfully injured. He was too well prepared, etc. What's wrong with he was very distressed or very injured or very prepared? It is not idiomatic. You can't use an intensifier with a participle. At least not very and to. Now that is, your ear should pick that up, you see. That this is not formal prose, it's not idiomatic. It's not idiomatic English. Now conceivably you could have a language where that wasn't so, but not in this case.
Why?
Yeah.
Why is that? What?
You'd be asking me to speculate. That's the way the idiom developed. Presumably something about the nature of a participle, which made people feel some special kind of stress or preparation was required to modify it, as opposed to an ordinary action. It's very red. They could put the intensive right on. But prepared, they need one further preparation to go into it as an adjective. That's all I could guess. But you're getting me into psycholinguistics there. What else in number 4? The back, yes.
Liable.
Okay, what's wrong with liable?
Liable has a context in law. A person's liable for something.
Yes, liable for something means to be held accountable, to be held responsible for. What is the word here where he wants to suggest probability?
Would.
Would?
It replaced was liable.
Oh no, but you're not getting quite the same meaning if you say he would. That's flat. You want to suggest a strong degree of probability with an L.
Likely.
Likely. That's the difference between liable and likely. And if you want to go one step further, you can look up in a dictionary of synonyms and get 3. Apt, likely, and liable. And they all have a distinction from each other.
Is libel here slang or?
No, libel is a wrong word. This is absolutely not slang. There's a formal term, libel, but it's bad usage. It's wrong usage. Not every linguistic error is a mistaken level in allude versus refer, or source and cause, or libel and likely. It's a confusion of different terms. It's the wrong synonym, wrong denotation. What else in number 4? Yes.
Anxious to get a raise.
Yes, anxious to get a raise is wrong. Why?
Anxious and...
Anxious implies?
Anxious means upset,
upset, worried, disturbed, and negative. And the word you want here is?
Eager.
Eager. Or depending upon how strong you want to make it, avid, lustful, etc. All right, number 5. Well, that's a stupid example just to capture one thing. Marianne.
The repetition of the STs.
Repetition, 4 sibilants in a row. The stature of statues was established by statute. That is a violation of what principle? Euphony.
Hygiene.
Number 6. Number 6. Remember, this is supposed to be English. Number 6 is in many ways a departure from English. Yes, Howard.
Okay, first word I think that would be employed.
Employed is wrong. Why?
Because it implies working.
There's a simple answer. You do not employ activities in English. You can perform them, but you cannot employ them. You can employ a servant, You can employ resources, but you can't employ a process. That's simply not the word's use or meaning in English, so that's out. Now, how would you reconstruct that? You could say these activities are performed, but, well, to use activity is just as bad as to employ. Same thing, only a shorter word. It's not English. What would be better if you want to avoid abstractitis given the rest of this passage? Instead of using a broad, empty term like activity, why not say, since we're talking about football, tennis, and golf, well, pastimes, games are played. See, something specific and direct. But this is a sign of a really poor style to say activities are employed. Really poor. It's a vague idea that there's something or other you do with them, but you don't focus on what the use of employed is in English.
In the context of the rest of it, some enjoy one sport, the rest enjoy another sport. Wouldn't enjoyed be better? The activities are enjoyed.
Well, you could, but that depends whether you want to repeat your concept of enjoy or not. You may want to just introduce it, first the fact and then the feelings of the people. That depends on your intention. All right, next, besides employed being wrong, what else in this? Cynthia?
We take out by lots of visitors.
Lots of is wrong. That is colloquial. For what formal term? Many. Next.
Would you take out sooner or later?
No. Sooner or later is a little trite, but sometimes you have to use it. What else in the next sentence on verse 6? Yes?
Kick out of football.
Kick out of football, yeah.
Half-dead metaphor.
Yes, which football brings back to life. Plus, kick is colloquial anyway. So you'd say some derive great enjoyment, or that's a little abstract.
I think there's a positive value here in bringing this half-dead metaphor back to life.
Well, if you do it in a deliberate way that's understood, then you're being cute. And if you think there's a value in being cute, well, depends on your audience, how much you're being paid per word. What else? Into tennis or golf speaks for itself. And what else? Yes.
The balance.
The balance. The balance is colloquial. Yeah. And you have to say the others. Or the rest. Balance is a term from weighing. Number 7. Yes.
Can I ask a question about number 6?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't the first sentence, wouldn't it be much better if you had visitors as a subject rather than activities?
Yes, you put it in the active voice. In normal context, it would be much better to say, visitors play these games sooner or later. And much simpler, straightforward, enters the mind without problem. But I'm not trying to correct everything, and there may be a context where you'd want to focus on activities, you see. Number 7. Horrible. What's wrong with 7? All right, name one thing, yes.
The whole thing is trite.
Well, name some triteness specific.
Limped into port.
Well, limped into port. In the nick of time is horrible. It's really awful. And with its best foot forward is trite. So that's one basic problem. The whole thing is a pile of bromines. What else? Yes.
You also wind up with the half-dead metaphor of limping with the foot.
Yes, the foot forward brings the limping into its initial usage, and now you see this horrible metaphor of a foot coming out of a ship. And what else? Something else is wrong with this. You have to watch these, Marianne.
Oh, the word boarding.
No, boarding is not wrong. Well, it is actually, but
Yeah, there's confusion. Is it ambiguous?
why is that ambiguous? To go on board.
Oh.
No, boarding is wrong, but not because boarding is wrong, because something else is wrong. Yes.
Well, I don't like her in this sentence with it's on the sentence before.
Well, that's a good
Her,
point. That's an inconsistency. That's an inconsistency. Change of person. I didn't think of that. I'm thinking of another two-letter word.
On.
On. The idiom is plan to, not plan on. And there's no explanation other than that is English. This is the type of thing that drives editors crazy. People who don't know the idiom. And you read enough bad copy, you lose your own ear for idiom. And pretty soon you have to ask someone, do you say plan on or plan to? Number 8, yes.
Well, in the nick of time is not just trite, it's a false meaning also, because
Right.
if a ship is limping into port, it's not in a hurry. It's going slow.
But maybe sinking.
Well, it was sinking, you see.
Well, that's,
Okay, number 8. I want to get this finished because we want to go to the exam yet tonight. Number 8. Now this is an adapted from Fowler. He did not discuss pragmatism. He had a different theory, but the use of certain terms here I took from Fowler. What's the problem with number 8? Yes.
Thanks to pragmatism.
No, that's not what I had in mind.
No.
Owing to pragmatism. It's a little colloquial. You mean that?
Well, the fact that you do not give thanks to something that you're saying something bad about.
Well, you can say in consequence of, and
Well, because of.
yeah, because of would be a little more formal, but I had something much more significant in mind, which is what here? This is actually taken from Fowler. What about the words, to speak this up, stunted and sterilized? Where do they, what's their primary use?
Animal.
Those are animal or biological metaphors. And what is the subject that is being stunted and sterilized? Means, which is an excessively abstract term. And consequently, Fowler gives this as an example of inappropriate metaphor. Stunted and sterilized are metaphors which are only possible if in some way you can fit the subject, at least in a personified way, into a biological context. And means of education is so abstract that it doesn't comport well with those metaphors. And the way he puts it is, the means at disposal indicates something too little, vegetable or animal, to consort with the metaphorical verbs. Education personified may be stunted, but means may not. And I think that's certainly true. Number 9. Now, A and B is the same sentence, written in two different styles of English, both wrong from the point of view of formal English. What is the trouble with A? Yes?
It's drowning in excessive non-Anglo-Saxonisms.
Well, well, that is a way of describing the error, quite in keeping with the trouble with that sentence. This is what Fowler called abstractitis, excessive abstraction, without placing as the grammatical subject the actual entity which acts. And in this case, who is the entity which acts? It's not a resettling which acts. The actor is, he did such and such. So this is all long, big words. Now, B is the same thought in a clear-cut way. It's not excessively abstract, but it is now what's the matter? Well, slang or colloquial. Plenty mad, extremely angry, and locating is also colloquial in this use. After moving to New York. Now, number 10, if we had 4 years, we could discuss all of the different possible meanings, but the intention of this exercise is just to let you see how many different things you could mean by such a statement as he could have been cool if he'd had it more together. Who had any single translation of that? Yes.
he might have been successful had he been better prepared.
He might have been successful if he'd been better prepared. What else? Yes.
He would have been likable if he had been less neurotic.
He would have been likable if he'd been less neurotic. What else? Yes.
He might have been calm if he had been in control.
He might have been calm if he'd been in control. He could have achieved more if he'd been psychologically healthy. He would have been happier if he'd been better organized. I mean, who knows? Because the whole idea is two slang terms. Cool, which is some kind of all-purpose positive, but so vague that it could include good or even more vague than good, or more specific, and had it together, who knows what, even the it is. So a sentence like that conveys only a feeling. It's an example of the fact that you cannot communicate in slang. Now, if we went through everybody, you'd probably get 35 examples, 35 translations. Now, number 11. Let's try to make this fairly brief by my just giving you an answer. Who got a distinction between motive and the other three? Now, there's still other synonyms which I left out. If we had more time, we could have put in object, objective, ideal. There's a lot of others, but we'll content ourselves with just this four. Did you distinguish motive from the other three? Mm-hmm. Did you do it correctly?
I think so. Yeah.
What is it?
Okay, basically a motive only applies to an individual.
No, I didn't. So let's drop that only for time. You know, the Socratic method is fine, except when we're running out of time. Then you have to go to the Aristotelian method, just give the answer and go on. Yes?
The motive is that what's causing you to act, and the goal is what you're acting toward.
Well, that's more on the track. The way most dictionaries distinguish it, a motive is the inner stimulus that prompts you to act. The inner state, like an emotion or a sensation. See, it's saying your emotion is love, hate, your motive is love, hate, hunger, desire, etc. The other three, purpose, end, goal, refer to the outer, to what you want to accomplish. Right? Now, within those, there are still many distinctions. What is purpose as the primary of these three? Yes?
The aim.
Well, aim is another synonym which is distinguished from purpose. Yes?
Purpose is...
You can't distinguish synonyms by a synonym because we're trying to catch the differences.
What are different synonyms for each?
Purpose is the goal of a policy of action, an ongoing, more sustained.
That's more in line with what most dictionaries list. That a purpose implies a definite, long-range, planned course of action. A thing that you're deliberately after across a period of time, and you have a course leading to it. You'd say, for instance, the purpose of law is to resolve disputes. We have a whole institution settled on across time, etc. Now, how would you distinguish purpose from end? The purpose of law, for instance, from the end of law. Well, end from the very name conveys what? What connotation, what slant, what angle that's distinct from purpose. Yes.
No.
Something long range, something remote or final, something that comes at the end. So you'd say, for instance, the purpose of law is to resolve disputes. The end is liberty. You see, when you're talking about the final culminating consequence of this specific course of action, you see. Now I'm just, making a start here to give you an idea that there are these type of distinctions. You could go on much longer. Now what about goal? Now there's less agreement about goal. The best thing I can tell you is goal, as I understand it, is a more general term than purpose in one way because you can apply it to unconscious entities. You can talk about the goal-directed behavior of living organisms and plants and so on, where you can't talk about their purpose. So purpose is already applicable to a conscious being pursuing a course across time, as opposed to simply a thing being structured in such a way as to act toward a given object, even though you can't say it's aware of it and is pursuing it. So there's that distinction. There is also, I think, a distinction that a goal is more specific, more concrete. It doesn't have the dignity of a long-range, settled course of action. You would more say, my goal is to get to the store. My purpose is to discover the truth, you see. Now, I don't want to dissolve. We could really spend a whole evening on this, and it might be clarifying, and you might find at the end that a whole nest of concepts, these plus object, objective, intention, aim, aspiration, ideal, suddenly come clearly into mind. And this is a helpful exercise. But we can't do it now. I just want to give you an idea that this can be done if you can do it. Now, finally, before we take our break, a brief exercise in making the adjectives more specific and thereby making it more colorful, more evocative, less flat. Now, here there are how many adjectives which are poor? I mean, poor in the sense of they're trite, they're vague, they're bromidic, they don't communicate too much. How many adjectives here in this passage? 4. Nice, big, good, or no good is the negative, and bad. Now, give me the passage, keeping everything else the same, but putting in more specific, colorful, or evocative adjectives, just to see what you can do with concretizing your these very general terms. What did you have? Now read it slowly so we can follow.
The girl looked attractive.
The girl looked attractive.
Though her boyfriend was brawny.
Though her boyfriend was brawny.
And the movie was boring.
And the movie was boring.
So Bill decided to speak to her. It was a painful mistake.
It was a painful mistake. Now, of course, you wouldn't necessarily put all of that in, but you see it comes much more to life. The only one there is attractive, is a little not too good. I mean, not too much. It doesn't say too much. It's overworked. But you had her boyfriend was brawny. The movie was boring. Is standard, but that's probably all you want to say. You don't want to have something so, so vivid about the movie that you lose attention to what's going on. And as a painful mistake is definitely better than bad because it more conveys what's going on. You had something basically different? Okay, read yours.
The girl looked sexy.
Now you're being concrete, yeah. The girl looked sexy.
Though her boyfriend was tough.
Though her boyfriend was tough. You're getting a little colloquial here now. Tough is a colloquial term. Yeah.
And the movie was lousy.
Well, I can give it up formal English altogether.
So Bill decided to speak to her. It was his first mistake.
Well, first is certainly a much more provocative adjective than that. I'm not clear that it's a specification. You've changed the intention now, but you gave me a colloquial rewrite. Of course, with this content, there's not much reason to make it formal. But if you did, I'll take one more. Who had, yes?
The girl looked sensual.
The girl looked sensual or sensuous?
Sensual.
There is a difference. Look it up. Yeah.
I believe it. I took big to mean something else. Though her boyfriend was obese. And the movie...
obese is much better.
No.
I mean, it's not better to be, but it's a better adjective because it's much more visual if that's your intention, yes.
Okay, and the movie was terrible.
Terrible is as bad as no good. Terrible is terrible.
Terrible.
Because it's a bromide, yes.
It was a horrendous mistake.
A horrendous mistake. Horrendous is pretty trite too. Now, I didn't have anything that good for the first three, but I liked my adjective for the last, so I'll conclude on that. I had, the girl looked angelic. Though her boyfriend was beefy, but I debated towering you know. And also, good one, but it sounds too effective, would be brobdignation. That's like a giant out of itself. And the movie was tedious, so Bill decided to speak to her. It was a fatal mistake. So they could really accomplish something with one adjective, because you tell the whole reason why it was bad. All right, let's take a short break and then we'll go over to the final. Now we turn to the final exam, which you had last week to do. And let's take up the answers, giving yourself for question 1, 2 points each for a correct answer. All right, using that paragraph. And keep your total score and then add it to the next, and you'll end up with your total score on the course. Number 1, an infinitive that is the object of a verb in the indicative mood. Raise your hand if you see one. Marianne.
To study.
To study. Now you're supposed to put only the necessary words, so to study. It's the object of a verb. What verb? Want. That's a verb in the indicative mood. That's why to say would not be acceptable, because the suffice is not in the indicative mood. What other infinitive could you have given? You only asked for one example.
To master.
To master. Either of those, and that's it. So 2 points or nothing. Number 2, coordinating conjunction. Yes.
4.
4. Now, if you feel you had an answer that's right that I'm not acknowledging, raise your hand, and if I ignore your persistently waved hand, it's simply because there's no time to discuss it. Yes?
But.
Where do you see but? Oh, the but also, you mean?
Yeah.
But would not be a good choice here because it is not a single conjunction. It's part of but also. Not only but also. And therefore, strictly speaking, it is not by itself a conjunction here. So if I were grading that, I'd give you 1 out of 2. Number 3, an indirect object. North.
Me.
Me. Gives the creeps to me. Creeps is the direct object and me is the indirect. Number 4. Well, I've just given it. Yes.
But also.
No, I want a pair.
Oh, one again.
If you get but also, you get 1 out of 2. Well, you have to get the 2, you have to give me both. A pair means 2. Yes.
Not only.
Not only, but also. 4 words for 2 conjunctions. Number 5, a verb in the pluperfect tense. A verb. I want only the verb. Yes.
Had heard.
Had heard. Right. If you say simply had, that's not enough. Because had could be the past tense of have. 6, a verb in the passive voice. Yes.
Has been proved.
Has been proved. The been is essential there. That's what makes it the past. Has been proved by so-and-so. 7, a verb in the subjunctive mood. Well, somebody certainly did this test. I'm getting a show of hands this time. In the back.
Seem.
Where is it? Seem is not subjunctive. Seem is simply appear, look like. There's nothing subjunctive about that. It would be subjunctive if it was a sentence like, lest he seem, instead of he seems, you see. But this is a perfectly straightforward. Some seem. It's indicative. Yes?
Suffice.
Suffice. Instead of it suffices, it's let it suffice. The let is implied. So that's wish, subjunctive. And a positive noun clause, Marianne.
That every man is a natural grammarian.
That every man is a natural grammarian. Right. That is an appositive after the noun theory. And it's a noun, it's a noun clause because it's an explication of what you mean by the theory. Number 9, a subordinating conjunction that yes.
I'm sorry, who are educated?
What is this are we doing?
Back to number 8.
A positive noun clause, who are educated, is not a noun clause.
Right.
Who are educated is what type of clause?
Adjective.
Adjective. So that's wrong. You'd get 0 out of 2 for that. If you're great. See, if your heart's in the right place and you limp out part of the answer, you get 1. But if it's, essentially wrong, nothing. These are the grading distinctions that make the difference here. Number 9, a subordinating conjunction that introduces an adverbial clause. Harry.
Although?
Although would be 1, because it tells you the condition under which something happens, or a concession. So that whole clause is an adverbial, and although, and there's another possibility.
Which?
Which, where is the which?
After the 2 dashes the first time.
No, that's not a noun, that's an adjective. Which I had always heard. What kind of theory? A theory which I had always heard is an adjective. Relative clauses are adjectives. We want an adverbial clause. So you can't get anything for the which. All right, continuing. There was another possible answer for number 9 beside although. Yes?
When?
When I was a child. Number 10. Now, if you're to get the 2 points on a main clause, you must give me exactly and only the words which constitute the main clause. And there are 3 possibilities, 3 main clauses in these 2 sentences. Who wants to give me 1? Nora. Now say it slowly.
It has been proved to be baseless.
Correct. It has been proved to be baseless. The main clause after a coordinating conjunction. 4 is not part of the clause. That's the conjunction, uniting. Another one. David.
Some seem incapable of succeeding at this goal.
Some seem incapable of succeeding at this goal. Suffice it to say, of course, it's its own clause. So that's not part of it.
The theory gives me the creeps.
The theory gives me the creeps is the main clause. That every man is, etc. is in a positive, which I had always heard when I was a child, are 2 modifiers. So the actual main clause is the theory gives me the creeps. Very good. Those are the only 3 possibilities. A restrictive relative clause. Marianne.
Who are educated?
Who are educated? A relative clause which modifies, in this case, students' grammar. Yes?
What about that every man is a natural grammarian?
That is not a relative clause. That every man is a natural grammarian is a noun clause. And that is not a relative pronoun. We discussed that in the homework, the difference between that as a pure conjunction introducing a noun clause and that as a relative pronoun. And in this case, this is introducing a positive noun clause, so it is not a relative clause. Number 12, a non-restrictive relative clause.
Which I had always heard when I was a child.
I want the clause only, which I had always heard. If you added in when I was a child, you threw in an adverbial clause in addition, so it's only 1 out of 2. The pure, non-restrictive relative clauses, which I had always heard. The theory gives me the keeps, and by the way, I had always heard. So it's a non-restrictive, it's an addition. Putting it in dashes indicates that.
You couldn't have a clause, a sub-clause as part of the
No, it's a different clause. A clause is by definition a union of subject and verb. So as soon as you've got I was, that's a new clause. Yes.
You're including the modifier always.
Yes,
Therefore,
which I had always heard.
But the other clause is also a modifier.
The other is an adverb of time, sure, but the difference is it's got a subject and predicate. Always is just an adverb. As soon as it's a subject and predicate, that's another clause. Now, you know, there's no use being rabbinical about it. You could say, well, this is an explication of all this, so it's part of that thought. But technically, a different subject and predicate, you're on to the next clause. An indefinite pronoun. Yes. Some. An adjectival prepositional phrase. Aaron.
At this goal.
At this goal modifies what noun?
Succeeding.
Succeeding. In what way modifies succeeding? In what kind of succeeding? What other prepositional phrase might you have given? Yes.
Of grammar.
Of grammar, modifying students. How many put to master as a prepositional phrase? There's not, because that's an infinitive. Number 15, a personal pronoun that is the subject of a main clause. And we only have 3 main clauses. And one, the subject is some, which is not a personal but an indefinite pronoun. And the second is the theory. So there's only one conceivable word left that could qualify. Yes. It. And the trick there, of course, is it's an impersonal personal pronoun. 16, a past participle used as an adjective. Yes.
Educate.
Educate. 17, a gerund. Succeeding. A slang expression. Marianne.
Gives me the creeps.
You could either say, gives me the creeps, or I would accept just the creeps, depending on whether you take what you take as the expression. But at least the word creeps has to get in there. An inflection that indicates a plural. The S on creep is not accepted. Yes.
There.
Which?
There before their subject.
Where do you see that?
Second one.
Oh, their subject. I guess so. All right. There is a variant. It's a plural. What else?
Why isn't an S accepted?
What?
S on the end?
Well, I don't assume there's an individual creep, of which this is the plural.
Oh, students. Students.
Right, students.
What's that?
The S on students. Right.
Oh, the S on student.
Yeah.
I said the S on creep. And what else might you have given? R, A-R-E, you could have given. The total number of clauses in the second sentence is, raise your hands. How many?
5.
5 is correct. The theory gives me the creeps, number 1. That every man is a natural grammarian, a positive, number 2. Which I had always heard, modifies theory, number 3. When I was a child, adverbial, number 4. And then the other main clause that has been proved to be baseless, number 5. Now you add up your total out of 40, just out of curiosity. An A on this little question by itself would have been 36 or over. How many got 36 or over? Well, that's very good. How many got under 32? Well, not many hands, but I don't know how many of you did it. All right, well, this is merely provisional. Now we get to the more challenging of these. 31 deliberate errors, and someone told me they found others. I only had 31 in mind. I tried to cover myself by saying only outright errors qualify, but maybe you found some that I hadn't considered. Let's go in order. You get 3 points each. And I would say approximately give yourself a point for grasping the error and 2 points for writing it correctly. And if you only half write it correctly, give yourself 1 and 1, like 2 out of 3. This is entirely up to your discretion and integrity. All right, let's just take them in order till we get to 31. As soon as you pass 20, then you're going into the bonus division, and so you just give yourself a 1. Either you get it or you didn't. You don't have to rewrite to get the bonus point. Okay, the first error. You have to, now, yes, I'd asked you to identify the error, so presumably, when you pick out the phrase, you should be able to state, at least in your own mind, what's wrong with it, and then correct it. All right, I'll try to spread these around. Yes?
The first thing is that the bullet was frightened.
Okay, badly frightened. Badly frightened is what error?
The misplaced modifier.
Misplaced modifier makes it look like it was the bullet, and presumably it's the manager. So you'd have to move badly frightened next to manager. The bullet missed the badly frightened manager, or the manager badly frightened detective. We can't reconstruct it until we have the whole sentence before us, because we don't know exactly where to put it, but we certainly must make it clear that since he was badly frightened, or whichever, we have to make it clear it's not the bullet. Number 1. Now, if you have what you regard as a substantive contribution to this analysis, go ahead, yes.
Okay. Would you call that broad reference?
No. I could not call that broad reference. As we use that term, broad reference applies to pronouns. No pronoun. It is a flatly misplaced modifier. Yes.
Dangling participle?
It's a dangling participle, a dangling past participle, if you want to call it that definitely. But to get the point, you don't have to go that specific. You just say misplaced modifier. Next. I'm trying to say next in order. If you missed one, you don't lose points as long as you got 20. Oh, let's pass this around. Harry.
I thought that it should be comma after manager.
Must be a comma after manager. Why?
Well, I assumed there was only one manager.
Correct.
But on rereading it, I suppose there could have been.
No, we're assuming that it's the manager of the store. There's only one, and therefore this modifier who fell to his knees is
a non-restrictive.
Non-restrictive, and therefore it must be Miss the manager, the one manager, comma. And by the way, he did so-and-so. And therefore, must be a comma, or a non-restrictive comma after manager. Next. Nora.
I think missed is the wrong tense. It's a simple past.
Well, why can't it be simple past?
Because it's an hour earlier.
No. The missing did not take place an hour earlier. If it was an hour earlier, it'd have to say had missed. But it doesn't say that the missing took place an hour earlier. It says that he fell to his knees an hour earlier. So some tense is wrong here, but not the missing. Yes?
The lady who is very attractive should be...
No, wait, you're way ahead of me.
Oh, sorry.
Yes?
Had fallen, fell.
Fell is the wrong tense. What verb did you have?
Had fallen.
Had fallen. To complete an action in the past. This took place an hour earlier. It was completed. He was on his knees for an hour when the bullet came by. And consequently, you have to say the bullet missed the manager who had fallen to his knees an hour earlier.
Can I argue about it?
No. Because I know the intention of the author.
But the point of grammar is to make your meaning unmistakable.
Well,
If grammar is wrong, then
it's wrong, but there's no logical way to take an hour earlier with the verb as far away as missed. When there is a verb, later it would make more sense.
Can I give you my interpretation of that later?
Can you hold it until the end and maybe we'll run out of time? Next, that's 3. Number 4, if you're keeping track. There I am.
Was the comma after, there should be a comma after earlier.
Oh, well, yes, no, that's part of 3. That's part of 2. Who fell to his knees an hour earlier should both be in commas, but that is not 2 errors. That's 1 error because it's the same issue. It's a restrictive clause. So we're still only on 4. What's next?
Decimated.
Decimated is wrong. Now, this is diction, not punctuation or grammar. What's wrong with decimated?
Well, you can't decimate a custom.
Well, why? What does decimated mean?
Well, I'm not exactly sure, but I know it's the wrong word. It means to wipe out of existence completely.
Yes.
To kill 1/10 of.
It really means to kill 1/10 of it. It's used for vast numbers of people, and you kill a huge mass of them, so it's not applicable to an individual. And you'd have to say it killed a customer. Next. Yes.
A lady who was very...
Yes, in this case, the tense of is wrong, because the Louise is no longer. So you could say was, or if you want to be very scrupulous, you could say
Had been.
who had been, because it was all over. Her attractiveness was over as soon as she was decimated. But you could get away with was, or who once was. Might be the nicest, simple way of describing it. But is obviously wrong. It implies she's still around, so it's the wrong tense. Now there's another error in the first sentence. This is one that we have in our exercise. I mean, in the appropriate class. So this is not a new one, and I put it in the exercise to prepare you for this example on the final. Yes.
The word revered, you're not sure whether the very modifies it or not. So it should say is very attractive and is revered if you want to say it that way, or is very revered.
Well, no, the very is not to be taken with revered, but that is not the problem. What is the real problem here with this? There's a definite rule that we learn. Under completeness of expression. Yes.
All would be all what? All what?
Well, in this context, all people. That's not an ambiguous pronoun. Yes.
Very attractive too.
Well, you're implying there has to be a specification of attractive. A person can be attractive without you saying to whom. Yes.
I tell you the correction was very attractive and was revered.
Right, and was revered. Because there's a different use of the word was. One is the copula, to simply connect a noun to its adjective. Another is as an auxiliary, part of a verb, of which the other part is the participle, and the whole word is was revered. And if you remember, under completeness of thought, they said you could not use the same word implied as a copula and an auxiliary in the same construction. So there would have to be a lady who was once very revered and was revered by all, or had been revered by all. So we get 6 errors right off the bat. Next. I'm forging ahead. We'll take detailed discussion if and when. You know, there's a certain pedagogical value after which it becomes Jesuitical. Next. Yes.
A tragic outcome, etc., is a sentence fragment.
A tragic outcome is a sentence fragment, not a sentence. No subject and predicate. Yes.
Didn't you say that in this you said only within the range of the optional? Didn't you say that a fragment could be used for emphasis?
A fragment sometimes could be used for emphasis, but this is not a case of it. Because this is simply out of the blue, without any context to make it appropriate. It's simply plain dropping of a statement. What is this? This was a tragic outcome, such or whatever, but just a tragic outcome just hangs. And next. I know that certain people did this exam. Yes.
The business after the dash, I just put a major value was destroyed and took out tragedy being rare, being unnecessary.
Well, suppose they want, though, to give the definition of tragic.
Well, that is giving the definition.
Yes, you say this was a tragic outcome, supposing we end the fragment. This was a tragic outcome, dash, a major value was destroyed. Okay, I would accept that because you have gotten rid of the error, but you haven't told me what the error is yet. So I would only so far give you half points for that. What is the error? Why do you have to do that? Yes.
Where is a location? Tragedy
Correct.
is a location.
What type of clause is introduced by where? Adverbial clause. What part of speech is tragedy? Noun. Being has to take the same type of construction on each side, so we have a noun, being, an adverb. And that is unacceptable. So this is a noun clause in place of a substantive. Excuse me, an adverbial clause. That's the technical error. You would have to, if you were keeping this exact construction, you'd have to say tragedy being the destruction of a major value. Then you have a noun on each side. Okay, next.
This is in the same sentence?
Yes.
This may be minor, but it seems to me outcome is a little bit imprecise. Event might be a little bit better.
Yeah, I thought that too.
Outcome. Why? What is wrong with outcome? Why
Well,
is it not
two things. One is a little imprecise, and
why
the
is it
reason
imprecise?
it's also a little bit colloquial.
That certainly both those criticisms, if at all correct, would come under inadequacy, certainly not outright error. So I wouldn't accept that. You have to not quibble over these things. The definition of quibbling is how much weight we give it. Next. You got another one?
Yeah, next one.
All right, next.
Shocked over.
Shocked over is what's wrong with that?
Unidiomatic.
Unidiomatic. The idiomatic would be?
Shocked by.
Shocked by. So that's 9. Next. Yes.
Sounded strange.
Strange, not strangely. Why? Remember, you have to give the reason.
It's an adverb.
Strangely is an adverb, but why can't you have an adverb after sound? You know? Yes.
It's a verb of state.
Yes, it's a verb of state or condition rather than of action. You're not saying how he did something, but how he was. We had exercises on this too, if you can remember all the way back. So that is, has to be, he sounded strange, that's 10. Next. See, these are all pretty straightforward, aren't they? Arlene. Like is wrong.
As if.
As if. Or could have as though. But certainly not like before a clause. Use of a preposition for a conjunction is the technical error. Next. Now to get some of these in, I had to make it sound a little ridiculous, but if you think it's easy, it took me about 3 days full time to make this up. You have to write with a whole list of the errors and then deliberately inject an error in such a way that the thing is not completely unintelligible. It's very hard to do. So if it sounds a little funny to you, that's why. Next. Yes.
That wanted to have hired.
To have hired is wrong. Why?
Well, it doesn't. I can't ever remember the right words.
What type of entity is to have hired?
That's the part I can't ever remember.
To eat is what? To eat is what? It's a verbal. What type of verbal? Is it a participle?
No.
What is it? An infinitive. This is simply the perfect, the past. To have eaten. That's a perfect infinitive. And what is the rule of using a perfect infinitive? Yes.
You can only use it if it precedes the action.
Only if it precedes the main verb. So it's the wrong tense of the infinitive. I wanted to hire. Next. Yes.
I was going to ask you, when you put it in that context, does it become a squinting construction?
Oh, I never thought of that. I wanted to have hired guards. Yes.
That's
Very good. Now you see, if you put that in, I'd give you the extra 3 points because I didn't see that. In the correct way, it wouldn't have led to that. I wanted to hire, but here, by putting it in the perfect, hired could be taken as the participial adjective too. Next. Now the next one is a trickier one, and therefore I would incline, despite the instructions, to give you like 4 if you got it. Just to compensate if you were over severe in rating yourself up to now. Who got this and what'd you get?
Complicated, and it costs too much actually.
Well, what's wrong with complicated and it costs too much?
Well, it's hard for an inanimate place to be complicated.
Why? Complicated is an awful lot of variety interspersed around each other and so on. I don't see that that's the wrong choice of word.
How about it costs too much?
What? All right, next. My number 13. I'll continue this number. That's what I wrote down. Marianne.
Well, I didn't separate the sentence, but it was no dice from the next sentence. I put a colon. That's somewhat minor.
No, that's unnecessary. You don't need a colon. People don't speak in colons. There's something more obvious than that. This is supposed to be, even though he's stating in formal prose, I remind you. Yeah.
No dice.
No dice. Colloquial or slang.
It's in a quote.
Even so, this is a grammatical exercise.
Impossible.
Yes, but it was impossible. Next. Now the next one is a trickier one, and therefore I would incline, despite the instructions, to give you like 4 if you got it. Just to compensate if you were over severe in rating yourself up to now. Who got this and what'd you get?
Complicated, and it costs too much actually.
Well, what's wrong with complicated and it costs too much?
Well, it's hard for an inanimate place to be complicated.
Why? Complicated is an awful lot of variety interspersed around each other and so on. I don't see that that's the wrong choice of word.
How about it costs too much?
What? Well, it costs too much, isn't that true?
I think too costly is better. Economy of words.
And it is too costly?
No. Well, I changed complicated to difficult, but New York is both complicated and too costly.
Well, as a matter of fact, you corrected the error, but you haven't told me what. You did something, and it is something far more significant than simply changing the number of words. If you change it to is both difficult and too costly.
Well, what costs too much? I mean, it is...
Well, it is obviously New York, there's no other reference. It's not that the pronoun is ambiguous. You are ignoring 2 words here which set down a certain requirement. The 2 words are both and they are correlative conjunctions which must therefore take
same thing on either side.
Parallel constructions, and this is a violation of parallelism because after one is an adjective and after the other is a clause. You know, that is an important error. So if you say New York is both complicated and costly, then you have put an adjective after each. Or, New York, how would you do it?
Not only is New York complicated, but...
Yes, not only is New York complicated, but it costs. Make 2 clauses. Thank you for rescuing me. Next.
Yes. Isn't this, New York is not the real subject of this.
Yes, it is. Why not?
I mean, the point, what he's trying to say is that hiring guards in New York is both too complicated.
Maybe that's what he wants to say, but what he actually came out with is the whole city is too expensive. Everything. So he's allowed to generalize his thought. Next. I mean, this is the point. You can't be over picky. It's perfectly clear when somebody says it costs too much that you mean everything. Most things. The essential things in this city are too expensive, obviously including guards. You can't be over refined here. I mean, I grant you, this is not ideally exquisite, but I would put this in as an infelicity rather than an outright error. Next. Yes.
So the antecedent to them wasn't clear on his next.
Well, you jumped one. Okay, the antecedent of them is obviously vague. Why? What is the antecedent?
The antecedent's guards, but it's.
So it's a remote reference. It could be dice or who knows what it stands for. What else? You missed a mistake there, though. A clear-cut, definite mistake. Right.
Us should be our.
Us should be our. That's what Fowler calls what?
Fused participle.
Used participle. Next. Fowler, you want to try one? Who sees another mistake here? There's a sentence modifier in the next sentence which is not separated by commas. However, it should have commas around it. Next. Who was frantically worried about the new store across the street? Yes. The manager, not the customer. So this is
Misplaced modifier.
Misplaced modifier, right. A long one. You'd have to say the manager, comma, however, comma, being frantically worried, or because he was, etc. This is another misplaced modifier. Okay, we're on to the next paragraph. Yes.
The killer was neither contrite, comma, nor did he grieve to my dear friend.
No, you're trying to separate two main clauses by a comma, is that it? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah.
Except in this case, it's not too good an idea because neither nor go together to form a unit. What are neither nor? They are correlatives, and a correlative has to take what? Parallel constructions, the same error as the above. Complicated and costs too much. So it would have to be, was neither contrite nor what?
Grieving.
Nor grieving or upset or whichever. Next. Or else you could say, the killer was not contrite and he did not grieve. So you make it two straightforward clauses. Yes.
She, not her.
Oh, wait. What else? Yes.
Well, that comma after friend. I mean,
Comma after friend in the likeliest interpretation is wrong. There's nothing here to suggest that the person has only one friend. So we're talking about, that would be an extraneous piece of personal information. So in this context, you assume it's the friend Louise. No comma. Restrictive.
Contrite violate some principle we've learned about simple, vivid language.
Contrite is simple and vivid.
I like sorry better.
Sorry is much more trite than contrite. Next, you had got the next one. Was it you who said?
Yes, she, not her.
She, not her. That, the implication is I have as much right to money as she does. So it's the implied subject. Next, obvious. Yes. Slob is slang. Next. Yes.
But there, it's appropriate.
No. It's not appropriate in an exercise on formal English, and I can't think of a context where it would be, because it's too light. It's too insignificant a term for a killer. You weaken your effect enormously by using a slob if somebody doesn't do his homework, you know. Rules at the dinner table, but not an outright killer. Yes.
Why isn't as much right wrong there?
What would you put instead of
I would put as much of a right. Because you would have a right to money. You don't just have right. I don't understand.
I think as much right is idiomatic, though. That would be acceptable. As much of a right sounds a little wordy to me. I wouldn't call of a right wrong, but I don't think it's mandatory.
Going on. Whomsoever should be whosoever.
Whomsoever should be whosoever, because it's the subject of stand.
You just make it whoever.
Whoever would be definitely better. This is ridiculously legalistic for a guy who says slob in the same sentence. Next. Now this is an important error, the next one. I mean, some of these are more and some are less, but this one is an unequivocal and significant error, yes.
It should be would.
Perhaps he would repent. Why?
It's a subjunctive.
Yes, so therefore what is a fallacy?
Wrong mood.
Switch of mood. From subjunctive to indicative.
Yeah. This one, I think convert him philosophically could be taken two different ways, whether it's a means or the subject of the conversion.
Say that again?
How could it convert him philosophically? It could mean the means of the conversion is by
what would the subject then be?
Or it could be...
What would the subject then be if it was the means? It's an ethical topic.
Well, it would be implied.
It's an ethical topic.
That's right. The subject
so
would
it still would be
ethical.
philosophy. And the only way you could convert him on that subject would be by philosophic means. So you are making what the scholastic would call a distinction without a difference. Now, that... Yes, Mary.
Have we gotten to 20 yet? I want to know what the change was.
Well, this last one was 24.
Where's 23?
23 was whosoever. 22 was slob. 21 was her. 20 was dear friend, comma, Louise. 19 was neither nor. I'm not going to go all the way back. We're going on now. The next sentence. Perhaps he would repent. Yes. I'm looking at you. Yes.
Sorry. The next thing I have, I'm not going strictly in order. These got jumbled around when I was doing them.
No, I want the next one in order.
I'm sorry. Better go past me then.
I know that philosophy.
I know that philosophy makes it misreading, and technically this is therefore a main clause in place of a noun clause. I know that philosophers, etc. Because this can be misread. Next.
Swell when indignation. That's a dead metaphor, right?
It's a half-dead metaphor which comes to life here. Why? As using another metaphor, undermine. So you get this picture of the building is collapsing and the philosophers are floating above it, you see, and it becomes absurd. Either one alone would be okay, but the two together gives you this architectural image in defiance of the law of gravity. Next, 27. There's no use frowning, Harry, because since I'm not acknowledging you, there's nothing you can do about that. Yes?
Concept structures.
Concept structures is what error?
Noun a positive?
No, not a positive.
Noun.
Because concept here is not a noun by itself, it's a modifier. It's the type of structure.
Non-modifier.
Well, what is that called when you do two of them together? You pile them up one after the other.
Noun pile-up.
Noun pile-up. It should be conceptual structure. Next.
Never mind.
Yes.
Such men, you don't know whether it's the philosophers or the killers?
Well, it seems pretty clear that such men is the philosophers, because that's the last referent.
Don't you think that you should say philosophers as a correction?
Not really.
And Fred have a point.
I don't know. That depends how tired you are. There is, however, a clear-cut error in this next sentence, Kathy.
Don't you need to take out the period and make it a comma and lowercase the d on the button?
Here, here.
No, you really don't have to. You can begin a sentence with a conjunction if you want to emphasize.
But not that sentence.
Yeah.
That depends on your intention. I do that all the time. So I am loath to regard that. I want it taken together with the proceeding, but I want it separate too. So you have your
Vote on that.
separate. Now there is a clear-cut, unequivocal error in that sentence. Yes.
The agreement deserves.
Deserve has to be deserves, because each is singular.
That's the next. Oh, I got that.
That's the sentence I was on. And now, next.
So in that case, don't you need a comma after the but? The beginning of that?
Yes, actually, technically, I guess you do. I didn't count that. Because I figured there are two short main clauses, therefore you could get away without a comma. And the and each is no possibility of misreading. So I don't think a comma is mandatory, but at this point I would be worn down. So if you put a comma in, I'd probably give you the point. I didn't intend it though. I am still on the 29. Yes.
Condemned, not attacked. You wouldn't, if you had a different...
Possible. I hadn't intended that, but I won't attack you for it. I had one in the next sentence. Clear-cut error, yes.
Should be on.
On, not on to. That's unidiomatic. And now comes two whopping errors in a row to conclude my series. Now, you may even have not got the intention of that second last sentence because of the error it commits. It's more or less unintelligible. Because it commits the grossest possible error which we actually began this course with. I meant this, who got that? Yes.
Well, they're using coordinating adverbial conjunction, thus you should have another clause after the comma.
Well, more than just that you should have another clause. What is the main emphasis of this sentence in the context?
Yeah, your main thought that they
You are reversing your subordination. You are putting a side issue into your main clause, and the essential thought is thrown away as a modification. So the thought is, merely by writing words on paper, they cause suffering and destruction, you see, and then the thing becomes clear. As it stands now, it's almost baffling. What is the guy even after? Because it's like they write words on paper. That's his thought, and it's simply baffling. So this is an example, but here you see the grammar becomes so poor that you can barely follow, and a lot of people, I remember the last time I gave this exam, simply didn't know what this sentence was after. Because by reversing the emphasis from main clause to subordinate, you lost the meaning entirely. And finally, the one I had in mind was, yes.
This, in the last sentence,
this
has no antecedent.
This is
whatsoever.
a very vague, some kind of broad reference to what?
Probably
is what can happen in life. Suffering can happen in life, philosophers can happen in life, what, depravity.
Bullets get bright.
Who knows? So this is a vague because broad reference. Now, if you try to rewrite this thing entirely, just off the top of my head, you'd have to say something like this. Now I did not write this out, so this is an approximate. The bullet missed the manager, who, having been badly frightened, had fallen to his knees an hour earlier. But it killed a customer, Louise, a lady who was very attractive and was revered by all, and who was. It was a tragic outcome, tragedy being the destruction of a major value. The manager was profoundly shocked by the event. He sounded strange when he spoke, as though he had just awakened. I wanted to hire guards, he said, but it was impossible. New York is both complicated and expensive. I could not approve of our spending money on such a service. Frantically worried about the new store across the street, however, the manager had once given gifts to his best customers. Or he once spent money giving gifts to his best customers. The killer was not contrite, and he did not grieve for my dear friend Louise. I have as much right to money as she.
Perpetrator?
My mind is a blank.
Killer.
The killer said. But I used killer twice. I want to express moral indignation.
Murderer. Degenerate.
The degenerate said, and I will kill whoever stands in my path. If one were to convert him philosophically, perhaps he would repent. I know that philosophers become indignant when their conceptual structures are challenged. But such men are dangerous, and each of them deserves to be attacked. Merely by writing words on paper, they cause suffering and destruction. This kind of disaster, this what? This, I don't even know the thought.
Murder of someone like Louise. That could happen.
This destruction of the innocent is the result in real life. Something like that. And that gives you an idea of how you can take this and put it into more focus. Now count up how many you got out of 20, and whether, the first 20 should be what you grade yourself on, and then the remainder over 20.
Mathematics is extremely difficult in this. Can you give us what the maximum possible score is? Because I did it by subtraction.
The maximum possible, the maximum score counting 11-point bonus, or 12 if you count that extra error, would be 60, 72. And then you would add that on to the 40, would be 112. That gives you a big leeway over and above 100. Now you figure out your total, and then you simply divide. If you got anything 90 or over, you got an A. Now here you had a big chance to get an A because it went up to 111 or 12, so you had a bonus. But given that, how many would say they got an A? Well, that's good. We got 5 or 6 got an A. I won't ask you to identify yourself further going down the scale, but if you got an A, you should be very pleased. Did anybody here get over 100? Well, that's very good. You, I can believe.
You adding the first and the second hand together?
Yes, you always add the 2 parts together to get the whole. Right. It's 40 and 60.
More rules then.
That's geometry, I think. All right, now we were supposed to have a question period. We only have about 5 minutes left. And that concludes everything. Does anyone have a question more or less directly on grammar of general interest and capable of being discussed briefly? That specification in itself completed our time for this course. Yes?
The use of the word nor as part of the correlative construction neither and nor, as opposed to the use of the word nor by itself used to introduce a main clause. It specifically came to light with one of the exercises that you had given.
Right.
I believe on homework number 6.
Homework number 6. I have that here. Which one did you have in mind?
We did not see the women in rags nor the men in tatters.
Oh, when to say or and when to say nor?
Right.
Like, when would you say we did not see the women in rags or the men in
tatters?
I don't know that I can formulate the rule. I think nor is wrong in this sentence because the not governs both. Nor means and not, or it has the or, but it also conveys the not stated again. So I think, but I'm not entirely sure here, that we did not see nor. The not would govern the nor and would give us two negatives. So it should be we did not see A or B. You see. However, as far as I can tell, that usage is so tenuous that if you want to emphasize the negative, you can put it in. That's the best I can say. But I would like you to take advantage of these last few moments to ask something a little more general and specific point of usage, because that you can look up better than getting from me, because I probably wouldn't know any of it without looking it up. Yes?
Can you tell us what the relationship is, the total content of the course to the epistemological problem of organizing concepts into propositional sentences?
Oh, I wish I could. Well, as you see, what we are discussing in this course is not nearly as exalted or esoteric as the epistemological problems of relating concepts to one another in propositions in the form where that would involve induction and the establishment of general truths. We're not saying anything here about how you validate general principles or even form propositions more broadly in a way based to establish claims to knowledge. All we are stating here is the basic requirements of putting concepts together in such a way that your intention will be clear. Now, my understanding is that epistemology would deal with how to establish the truth of the combinations, their relationship to reality, and not simply the technical ways in which they have to be put together to communicate some combination that can be clearly grasped by the mind. Now, it's possible that if someone works that out, epistemologically, you could then abstract principles which would on one level be guidance to the acquisition of knowledge, and at another level, guidance to the principles of grammar. I haven't done that, so I couldn't. I couldn't even begin to speculate on a question. Now, that's what I'd call a deep question, but too deep. Yes?
You mentioned this evening that the depth of inflection in English is an ongoing process. You think it's going to continue.
Yeah.
Latin reached the stage where inflections were used so much that word order didn't matter at all, which is one of the things that makes it such a poetic language.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible that English will go as far in the opposite direction, so that inflections won't matter at all?
I don't know whether we'd ever get to this stage where inflections don't matter at all. I don't think it would be amazing if that happened. But on the other hand, some inflected words like I and me have enormous connotation, and I can hardly imagine either dying out. And so long as they stay, some element of inflection is going to remain. Also, singular and plural is very hard to imagine. That is so built in to the language, in verbs, in nouns, in pronouns, in everywhere you look, that I can't imagine exactly what set of circumstances would ever make that start to fade. And it's helpful too. So offhand I can't imagine, but on the other hand, I could never say it's impossible because I can't prove that some kind of inflection is necessary.
That's it. You want to go on any further?
Is that at the end? Okay, our time is up. I'm sorry it was that brief a question period, but that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.